Dreams, as discussed by Martin Scorsese in his introduction to Michel Simon's book Kubrick, are another of Eyes Wide Shut's main topics. Scorsese emphasizes that the English translation of Schnitzler's German-titled Traumnovelle is Dream Story. He attributes the film's initial widespread negative reaction to the fact that audiences really had no preparation for a dream movie that didn't announce itself as such, without the usual signals. Hovering mists, people appearing and disappearing at will or floating off the ground. With a subtly antithetical design, Eyes Wide Shut is a story conveyed in an unusual manner, leaving many viewers scratching their heads. But Scorsese says Kubrick was a visionary. Like all visionaries, he spoke the truth. And no matter how comfortable we think we are with the truth, it always comes as a profound shock when we're forced to meet it face to face. One of the supreme truths in this film is that not only is extreme wealth not sexy, but in fact nightmarish and grotesque. Scorsese's note about Eyes Wide Shut being a dream movie that isn't presented with the usual markings of such is an important point in understanding how to regard it, and perhaps why many find it so confusing or an outright failure. But when approaching the movie with this in mind, a lot makes sense from the perspective that what we see is not actually happening, except in Bill Harford's imagination. The illogical seems more logical then. Although it might not be readily apparent, much of what we're witnessing may in fact be a dream. Several times throughout Bill's adventure, he shows his medical identification card to people he meets, as if to continually confirm his status, identity, and verify his existence, to himself perhaps more than to others. Identification is of course the full form of the abbreviation ID, which according to Sigmund Freud is the unconscious part of the mind that contains a person's primal instinctive impulses, including the libido. It is the dark, inaccessible part of our personality. What little we know of it we have learned from our study of the dream work, and of course, the construction of neurotic symptoms. And most of that is of a negative character and can be described only as a contrast to the ego. It is filled with energy reaching it from the instincts, but it has no organization, produces no collective will, but only a striving to bring about the satisfaction of the instinctual needs, subject to the observance of the pleasure principle. When Bill offers to show his identification, to Mr. Milich, to Sally, to the diner waitress, he's in effect saying, from a Freudian standpoint, let me show you my... Freud says that in the ID, contrary impulses exist side by side, without cancelling each other out. There is nothing in the ID which corresponds to the idea of time. Time is a prominent thread throughout the story, which unfolds preposterously over the course of about 2.5 days. Bill's second line in the film is,
now listen, you know we're running a little late.
He continually looks at his wristwatch before entering the Nathanson residence in front of the Sonata Cafe the day after the Somerton affair, and at Milich's where he says,
Mr. Milich, I've obviously left things a bit late.
Bill is like the White Rabbit from Alice in Wonderland who laments his lateness while looking at his pocket watch. Outside Somerton, the cab driver asks Bill, how long you gonna be? Bill replies, I don't know, maybe an hour or more, but maybe only 10 minutes. When Domino asks Bill for the time, he checks his watch and says,
12:10.
A moment later in her apartment, Domino says, don't worry, I don't keep track of the time. Then Alice calls Bill asking how much longer he will be. It could be a while. Any idea how long? No, I don't really know. It's dream time. Labeling Eyes Wide Shut. An erotic thriller isn't really an accurate description except as the most basic, superficial categorization of such a complex film. Yes, sex is a subject in the movie, and yes, it's suspenseful at times, but the only sex we're shown is in a situationally gratuitous context at the mansion scene, and it's less erotic than it is cold and voyeuristic, since we're seeing through the eyes of the protagonist, who himself doesn't actually engage sexually. It might more fittingly be described as a slipstream fantasy, a subgenre of speculative fiction in which characters inexplicably slip in and out of alternate timelines, parallel dimensions, and/or streams of consciousness, in which some similar qualities persist, while others are skewed or inverted. Loops in time. Characters' traits transposed, illogical scenarios. On one hand, the genre prescribed to a story doesn't matter much and is merely a label to advertise the work. But on the other hand, this label can be important to frame the work in a certain context and prepare the audience for a particular mindset through which to receive it. But whatever the genre, Eyes Wide Shut is certainly a visually and aurally dazzling, thought-provoking work with seemingly infinite, intertwining layers, symbols, and illusions, worthy of considerable debate. Kubrick was always very involved in his film's promotional campaigns. However, since he died 4 months before Eyes Wide Shut was released, it's unclear how much influence he had on its marketing in this case. Although it's now largely agreed that the marketing of Eyes Wide Shut was flawed by mislabeling it as an erotic thriller, in retrospect, it's actually fitting that it was billed this way. It strengthens its standing as satire in that it's more cold and creepy than hot and steamy, and thus perhaps appropriately misunderstood. A sex movie where the protagonist never has sex. A dream movie that isn't obviously one. Kubrick even kind of parodies the "it was all a dream" cliché B-movie ending with the last bit of dialogue between Bill and Alice. She says they should be grateful that they've survived all their adventures, whether they were real or only a dream, to which Bill replies, "And no dream is ever just a dream."